Welcome back to the Crud Builder, everyone. Today I am embarking on a project that's very important, is wiring up the car. So you can kind of see some wires in there, a little bit messy. I've done a little bit of pre-work just so that I could kind of cycle the motor and test some things out. But today we're going to actually be setting up the wiring properly in kind of the long-term fashion that it's going to stay in all the way up until showtime. So I'm going to climb in the car here and just kind of walk you through a little bit of what we have to deal with today. So, and forgive me, it takes a minute to get inside the car. It's very tight in here. All right. Okay. So, I'll just walk you through some of what we're going to be dealing with here. So let's start with our switch box. I think I've shown you guys this switch box before. It's mounted up, all the switches are ready to go, and we have wires ready to splice. I'm using all thicker gauge this year. I've used thin stuff before. Sometimes it melts and burns, and so this is probably a little thicker than what I need, but that's okay. It's better to go big than wish you had. So the fan is real simple setup. The fan is just going to have one wire going to our hot on the battery, coming up to this switch, and then the other wire extending from this switch is going to go out of the car, well, out through the firewall and straight towards a DC 12 volt electrical fan that'll be attached to the radiator. So that is a real simple one. The fuel is also very simple. Here's the fuel pump, and when we say this fuel switch, what we are talking about is this fuel pump. Here is our hot, and we're gonna wire this hot to the top of the fuel switch wire that's coming out. The bottom, again, will go to the hot on the battery, and then we have to build a ground. I kind of just twisted the ground around this just so I could test this fuel pump, but we are going to put a terminal on this, and we will actually build a real ground for this, a more reliable ground, because if your grounds, you want everything to be grounded very securely. Things are going to move around during the show. If one of your grounds comes loose, you are going to lose whatever system that ground is attached to. So if the ground wire comes loose on this fuel pump, I'm going to lose fuel. If the ground wire, comes loose on my main ignition, I'm going to lose spark from the spark plugs. So you want to make sure that you ground everything real nicely, and I recommend grounding to a bare steel portion of the cage. You can weld on stuff like this, but I'm just never quite sure about it. So something like this, where it's just bare steel, is the best place to ground to. So that takes care of fuel. Ignition. Now the ignition is this has an HEI distributor in it, so it's a one wire setup. There's one wire, I've got it right here, this purple one, that goes right to the hot. Now I did just kind of twist it into this big one when I was testing the motor out. This that comes off the hot on the distributor is going to go again to the top of our switch here for ignition. The bottom right here is going to go to the hot. And then lastly is the starter, the starter button. This is what is going to engage the starter motor, which is going to spin the flex plate, which is going to start the engine. This has there's two wires set up for this. This big red wire is going to get attached to the battery all the time. This goes into the starter motor. There is a second little piece, little wire, that normally if you want to test the motor, you can just bridge the two with a screwdriver or something like that. But under normal circumstances, you would have a smaller wire coming off that. That's what's going to go to my switch. So again, the bottom here is going to go to the hot. The this top one is going to go to the smaller wire on the starter motor. And so that way when I hit this button, it's going to bridge the connection, and that's what's going to send power to the starter motor and start it up. It actually draws the power from the bigger, but the circuit's completed by the smaller one. And so that's why GM starters can get away without a solenoid. The solenoid's basically built into the starter. So let's talk about battery for a second. So here's my battery. This is gonna be my ground wire. In fact, let's just take this off for now. So that ground wire will be nicely ground to the cage. Now this battery has some accessory kind of little threaded bolts that are coming out of the terminals. Now I've used these before. The problem with them is they're thin, and so if they heat up, you know, say you're stalling out during the show and you're continually, you know, having to start the car, right? If these posts get too hot, they can melt off. I've had that happen. So we're always going to use the big posts. I've learned this lesson the hard way. That being said, the big posts, you know, with some of these wires are going to get these wires are going to get redone with different terminals. But the problem with this post, for example, is there's nothing that I can run an accessory off of except this little cord, so I mean, I guess I could run the starter that way, but I'm going to be running a bunch of stuff to the hot, right? Like the fan, the fuel. And so what I did was I picked up these terminals here, and I think these terminals are going to be better. So these terminals can go on here, and then I can actually loosen this. I actually think they're supposed to go this way. There we go. But this can be loosened. I can run one big wire off of one side, and then I can actually just take terminals and just bolt the terminals right to this plate with these bolts. So I hope this works out okay. I've never used these before. Picked them up on Amazon on the cheap, but I think they're going to be pretty good. There's also the other reason for these two is that I also need a spot for an alternator. So yeah, but yeah, batteries. This is a deep cycle RV battery, marine battery. I like these. They tend to last longer. I am probably not going to run an alternator this year. Instead, I've built a battery box that has enough capacity to run 2 of these deep cycle batteries back to back and run them in cycle. When you run a battery in cycle, you're basically taking 2 batteries and making them into one larger battery. And the way that you do that is your ground will be grounded. This positive will go to the negative on the other battery, and then you'll have a positive over here. So you're basically just converting 2 batteries into one big battery with a negative over here and a positive over here. I don't have the second battery yet, so for today, our purposes, we're just going to be wiring everything up and leaving it open for when we have the final battery set up. But the first couple of things that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the fan installed and get the wire run for the fan. That'll be an easy, quick one, and so we'll get started on that. Talking fans, here is the fan that we're going to use. It's the same fan that I used last year, and the reason why I love this fan is because it actually has a metal frame. A lot of the fans I find at the junkyard are just the cheap chintzy, ones that have just a plastic frame, and I don't know. Someone told me a long time ago that if it's not steel, it's not real. So I like this one. It's got multiple points that I can use for what we'll be using to mount this to, which let's see here. Here they are. These will be what we use to mount the fan up against the radiator, and they work good. So show you what they are. They're basically like a zip tie, but they're like a front to back zip tie. So this basically goes through these holes, through these holes and through the radiator, and then there's another piece, zip tie like piece, that'll snap until it's nice and tight. A couple other details about this fan before I put it on. This little blue one is the ground wire. I taped these together a long time ago. Here is our actual wire. You're probably wondering what this is. This is a fuse. Fuse blown? Shouldn't be. All right. So why would you put a fuse on this, Rob? The reason why you want to put a fuse in between the circuit, or in between the wire on your fan, is because if this fan gets blown away, what you would have is you could just have power just running through to a fan that's not working and draining your battery. This fuse will prevent that from happening. So if the fan gets taken out, I don't do a fuse on everything, but a fan I do a fuse on, because where the fan is up front, the front takes a lot of hits. It's getting hit all the time. Things are flying into it. Chances are you may lose your fan. I didn't lose this fan last year, so this fan is a lucky fan, but we'll probably just use this wire again. I may have to lengthen it. It's probably not long enough, but we'll come up, we'll zip tie in to the halo bar over our motor, and then come down through the firewall right into the switch. We've gotten the hood off, and we're ready to mount this thing, but before I mount it, I do want to test it just to make sure that it still works. Real easy to test. I'm just gonna hook it up to the battery and see if it starts spinning. So let's see if I can do this without chopping myself up here. Okay. There's your ground. Yeah. There it goes. So, it still works, which is great. All right. So, fan is on there nicely. So we'll extend this ground wire and ground it somewhere to the core support, and then this will flow to the back towards our switch box. So we'll wire that up next. Now, a lot of guys will tell you a lot of different things about electrical. Don't have a switch box, just run wires and twist them together, yada yada. Use a shrink wrap, you know, deals to attach your wires. I just splice them together, old school, and I find it to be the best way to go. I do use switches, but I have never gone wrong just splicing wires together and taping them. Beats a terminal all to hell. Or connector. Connectors break. I've seen so many connectors break or warp, or so this is just the way I do it. This is the Crud way. If you want to do it fancier than this, you want it to look cooler, that's up to you. I'm just telling you what works for me. Replacing the terminal on the big one. I got the old terminal off, which was this guy. And now I'm just tightening the new terminal. I think this is going to work pretty good. For a multitude of reasons. One, if this ever melts off or whatever, it'll be much easier. Starts to melt or whatever, it'll be much easier to replace this terminal than the previous one, which was just hardwired, and I ended up having to cut it off. And then the real benefit of this terminal, which I'll show you in a second. I just want to make sure it's pretty good and tight. So it's gonna sit in there. Oh, it's gonna sit in there like that. But when I go to run my accessories off of it, I'm just gonna attach them to these bolts, and I have these little nuts here that will work perfect. So they will attach underneath, and then I will tighten these nuts up, and that will take care of all my little accessories that are going to run off of this big hot, which is going to be my ignition and my fuel and my fan. So before I even wire this onto here, I'm actually going to wire those on. Those are going to be all the ones that come off the bottom of these switches. Alright, I've created these three little wires here with some terminals. These terminals will bolt to this guy, and the bottoms of these three wires will go to the bottoms of my switches. And then the actual components, fan, fuel pump, distributor, will wire in to the top. So we'll do that right now, and you know, hopefully be able to give you guys a demonstration here in a second. Alright, hopefully you guys can see this. I just need one more component is going to bolt a nut to this one, and I have that nut here that is for the starter. So that's going to go like that. Once this is done, then I'm going to have to set my grounds. I need I will ground the negative on the battery will ground to the cage, and to do that I'm gonna have to weld a bolt to the cage. So those are ready to go. I'm gonna weld this little bolt to the cage, probably right up inside here. I don't know if you can see that. And then this ground wire will attach to that ground. So, and then the other ground I have to weld will be this nut, or bolt, which will here, and then this ground can utilize that along with these washers and nut there. So we're getting very, very close, and I'm gonna weld these on and set my grounds, and then I'll come back to attach everything and show you the finale. All right, I got ground welded on, ground welded on here. So we're very close. car is grounded. What do we have left to wire here? I have to wire the top of the starter button, the ignition, the fuel, which is right there, which I also have to ground the fuel. So we're getting close here, my friends. Well, I've got everything wired here on my first 3 switches. I have my ground set up for my fuel pump. I have my ground set up for my main. I have a new terminal installed on my big hot, and I am gonna test. Ignition's hard to test. You guys won't hear anything, but the fan and the fuel we can definitely test. And so that is what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna ground the car. Car is grounded. I'm gonna hot the car. Car is hot. And now we should hear a fan up there. I don't know if you could hear it, but let's see if we can see it. Fan is good. All right, fan is good. Let's try fuel. Fuel is good. So we've got fan and fuel, which is all good. And I imagine ignition would work as well, but we're not going to give the engine spark right now because we're not starting it anyway. But fan, fuel, we are rocking and rolling, my friends. I'm gonna shorten that ground wire, and we'll hook the starter up. All right, I wanted to show you guys this. So this is the big hot that you got to see on the other side, and then this is the little hot that goes to the switch. So those go up through the firewall. Big hot is attached to my terminal here. Little hot to the top. So now we have final. We have our fan. We have our fuel. And we have our starter. So she's wired, and we just have to make some engine adjustments, and then we'll do a video reveal of her firing. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.